Hey everybody, we're going to talk today about something called the ELMSLN API, which has been built off of the JS API. It's patterned off it, rather, and how you can use Drupal to hit a much lower bootstrap level. Now this is in Drupal 7, but you may not have heard of the JS API. I never had, but it's a pretty cool concept, similar to something like auth cache, where you hit an alternate copy of index.php that doesn't assume a full bootstrap of Drupal. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, if you look at index.php in Drupal core, you see we've got a require once to bootstrap the system, and then calling to do a full bootstrap, and then executing the active handler, which is basically going to process the page delivery. But first, Drupal is going to go and assemble all this stuff, right? You might have a lot of modules on your site. Some of our sites have 180 or so. So you need to get that performance anywhere you can by not having to do a full copy of Drupal core. What the JS API does is it drops a file that looks similar to this. All right, so find where Drupal is, load in some of the things required for any request of any kind, but then our bootstrap only hits the database. So we're only loading the settings.php, and then we're loading the ELMSLN API module, and then we're executing the request. So the reason we're doing this is, and you can find the code. It's in CIS connector if you want to kind of dig around and see what we did with it. Is that if you're not familiar with Elms Learning Network, it's basically a cluster of Drupal sites. They're much smaller in scope than any one site, and then we use RESTful web services to kind of keep things stitched together. Well, now we've got RESTful web services and we've got this low bootstrap ELMSLN API. What this lets us do, refresh this page, is haven't seen Elms in a while. We've got kind of our network, and so this is what makes up our course effectively. We've got all these different applications that a student can have their experience across, and each of them is focused. And so, if I'm in content, I might be reading some course material, right? This is a standalone Drupal site that's not bloated down by this really cool but very drastically different studio appliance, which is for students to critique each other, upload work, get feedback, things like that. So what we needed was something that didn't do a full bootstrap of Drupal core. And where you can see this working is, so we'll do course name, things, and title, stuff. And so we'll save. And what this is going to do is, using the HTTPRL module, which allows for non-blocking calls as well as queuing up calls to send them all at once, we're able to effectively queue up calls and then push them out. So first, the API looks and finds the sites that it needs to care about. In this case, there's a course system, a blog system, discussions, and this thing called Innovate, and the studio. And so it looks at all of its siblings in this network and then pushes out to them, in this case, data that has to do with the site's name and slogan. And so I'm GPMing this at the moment so you can see what it's doing. But this effectively spidered 12 web requests there in the time that it took to click save. One that spidered for this variable things, one that spidered for title, and one that spidered for the theme settings, but we won't go into that. And what the impact is, if I go to any of these other systems, these are actually different Drupal sites, but you'll see this stuff thing master is actually, if I dig into the guts of Drupal and site information, you'll see it is thing stuff. To prove that this actually did something, not lying here, right? So we'll save it in Studio. This is one database, and the change is darn near instantaneous across all the rest of them. So it's able to do this because it's not bootstrapping a full copy of Drupal core. So what you can do with an approach like this is build your own very small menu system type of a structure. So I'm going to delete my DPM because I don't care about that. And what we're going to look for is this. So the first thing that it will do, instead of doing a full-on session authorization, is this is a call structure that's basically one part of the system knowing that it can talk to the other part, and it has this handshake that it does via basic authorization. So in our drop-in replacement here with this execute request, you see we're actually validating that the handshake is successful. It's going to validate the handshake, username, password, PHP auth, and it's going to match it to a file in a module that we know is running on the other site. And then it's going to build out of that module based on what distribution it is, it'll know how to calculate the username and password to send the transaction. So it's doing that on the one side, it's knowing the structure with which to build the request, and on the other side, how to decode it, if you will. The critical thing here is, in the majority of cases, we can make this call with only bootstrapping Drupal's database and 2 modules, as opposed to 180 plus. It's ridiculous performance savings. Another neat thing we took from the JS API is this. So in our API, we see what our calls look like. This is to do a remote vset. That's what the example I showed is using. You can tell Drupal what it has to bootstrap to. And so you've got this contextualized bootstrap. Now, for example, this is just playing around. Obviously, REST-WS does these types of things with full RESTful communications. We don't need an alternate API for that. But you can see that we have the ability to define a full bootstrap in order to accomplish this task. Something else we've done via this API is clear cache bins. Right? So there might be data that we know is stale in another site as a result of our site having its content updated. We don't want to go through and do some kind of like services-based approach, tripping a job with a full bootstrap. What we can do is we don't have to bootstrap anything. We have the database, right, as the lowest level. And so what this will do is ask it to clear a cache bin, make sure that the cache bin exists, and prefixes it with cache so you're not accidentally blowing away your system table or something. And then it's going to delete the cache bin. So drops everything in it, returns, hey, that was successful. In instances where we need to do that, there are certain jobs where we know there's stale data because we're caching HTTP requests, for example. This is an absurd level of performance improvement. So you can see the call structures are pretty simplistic. In the case of a vset, it's we bootstrap to variable set. You could get away with bootstrapping just the database to set variables. Wouldn't necessarily recommend that. But it is possible. So you can step through and let us know if you have any use for something like this. I thought it was a neat kind of design pattern. Allows us to hit a much lower bootstrap to do like batch jobs and things of that nature that otherwise when we were hitting via the normal Drupal HTTP requests and doing a full Drupal bootstrap, we were really it was a slog on performance. So that's it for today. If you're interested in learning more about the project, you can go to ELMSLN.org. We've got a full demo now running the technology. Thanks for checking us out.